Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. Today, we'll be going over some hot topics, and this will actually be our last Hot Topics episode, as we'll be getting into more 2022 NFL Draft related content after this as we dive into scouting for this upcoming draft process. But of course, we'll always keep you in the loop about some of the things that are happening around college football and the NFL. And right now, maybe the hottest topic is the absolute dominance of Cowboys rookie linebacker Micah Parsons. And so we just wanted to talk about a few things regarding him. And I'm just going to give you a little stat dump right now about how he's been doing. That just goes to show how absolutely dominant that he's been. On this season, he has 12 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and a pressure rate of 21.6% on his pass rush attempts, which is second in the NFL. And he's been even more impressive in the last 6 or so games, as he has at least 1 sack in each of those games. And since week 9, he has 9.5 sacks, which is most in the NFL, 16 quarterback hits, which is also most in the NFL, 10 tackles for loss, also most in the NFL, and 3 forced fumbles, tied for most in the NFL. He has been an absolute superstar. And what are your initial reactions as you've been watching his rookie season unfold, having scouted him in the spring?
Just wow. And watching how he's played this year. I mean, how did he not go higher than 10? I mean, he deserved to have been, probably the first non-quarterback taken with how he's been playing. And I think to start off talking about his stats a little bit, he's 7th in the NFL in sacks, and he's a rookie linebacker. So he's not rushing the passer. Everyone ahead of him and everyone close to him rushes the passer every single play. So it's just absurd that this dude has been in the NFL he's played, 13 games now?
Yeah.
And he already has 17 NFL sacks, doesn't rush the passer every play. He still drops back into coverage. He had that dropped interception this week. But, I mean, he's been extremely impressive in coverage, and I think that's something we're going to get to, where we're a little skeptical of his coverage abilities in college.
Yeah, let's get into our analysis of him. You ask why he didn't go higher than 10, and I think that there's a clear response there, and it's really the character concerns that came out regarding him. We both had him as our first linebacker. You had a 1.5, I had a 1.6, which are mid-first round grades, meaning we liked him a lot, but we didn't like him enough. But I know that I dropped him by really several fractions of a whole point there because of the character concerns that came out. For those that aren't familiar with them, there was a lot of issues regarding his behavior towards other teammates. There were some really honestly obscene things regarding some what really seemed like sexual harassment towards some teammates, and just a lot of immaturity in how he acted towards his teammates, a lot of bullying concerns. And so that brought him from what would have likely been maybe even a 1.3, which is a top 10 grade on our scale, to a 1.6. And I imagine that pushed him down some NFL boards. So you say, why did he go as low as 10? And you know what? Maybe without those, which apparently haven't been too much of an issue in terms of being able to translate his talent onto an NFL football field, he would have maybe gone in the top 5 without that. And then, the coverage ability, I thought that was extremely overblown. Some people were saying that Parsons just can't cover it all. You can't pick him anywhere near the top 10. I thought that it wasn't necessarily a strength, but it wasn't a weakness. And, that's kind of what it is in his game now, is he's capable in coverage, but it's not his strength. But that doesn't matter, because in the passing game, you want him rushing the quarterback anyway. And I loved his ability to do that coming out, which is why I did still rate him pretty highly. But I think and another one of my concerns was that he was a 2020 opt-out. And I just thought that I kind of had a minor docking of certain players for that. And so if you look at it, the 3 things that I just listed, the coverage concerns, which really weren't even that big an issue, opting out, and character concerns, 2 of those 3 aren't really related to his ability to play on the football field, which when you combine with his elite traits, it's not too surprising looking back at the evaluation that he did turn out incredible. However, to this extent, that I don't think anyone was really expecting him to be really a defensive player of the year candidate.
Yeah, and I think this kind of before we talk about his defensive player of the year candidacy, I feel like all season we've been talking about opt-outs, and we were concerned about would they take a little bit of a while transition since they haven't played football in over a year at that point. I mean, Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater, Penei Sewell,
Yeah.
all opt-outs have all been playing extremely, extremely well. So I mean, honestly, I'm surprised that we didn't see more players opt out for the 2021 season and say, hey, I'm going to get ready for the draft. Because, I mean, yeah, for the top end talent guys, I mean, they haven't skipped a beat. And, I mean, obviously that shows, and they were projected to be some of the top players in their draft, and they obviously are.
Well, you have to consider that the guys making those decisions for the college football 2021 season didn't get to see whether or not these players who opted out would be successful. And, I'm thinking of a guy like Derek Stingley who decided to come back and play, even though he had a couple seasons of really elite tape. He ended up getting hurt a few games into the season and has been dealing with that injury since. Maybe if he saw this sample size of elite opt-outs who are not missing a beat as they start their NFL careers, he would have made a different decision. But I think that we can refocus on Micah Parsons here and talk about that defensive player of the year case, because you know what? Forget defensive rookie of the year. It's going to be Micah Parsons, but he actually really has a case for defensive player of the year now. The first time I heard someone say that, I almost brushed it aside because I was just thinking of, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. These are really the defensive superstars, and they're having terrific seasons. But I was listening to Ryan Clark talk about this, and he was saying that if in his opinion, if Micah Parsons was playing solely edge rusher like Garrett and Watt, he would break Michael Strahan's record of 22 and a half sacks. And if he was playing only middle linebacker, he would be playing to the level where he'd have 130 tackles. And he added that Micah Parsons is on pace to have the first 14 sack, 100 tackle season since James Harrison in 2008. And guess what? James Harrison won Defensive Player of the Year that year. So when you really consider the statistics, where he may not be leading in any single category, but he still is elite in multiple categories, and that you have to understand that he's not rushing the passer on every single down like Garrett and Watt, and he's impacting the game in several phases to a greater extent than them. You know what? There really is a serious case for Micah Parsons for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, totally. I think over the past, couple of years, it's been Aaron Donald, and yeah, he's been the best defensive player in the year for the past, 4 or 5 years. But I think before that, it almost turned into, oh, who has the most sacks? Oh, they should probably get Defensive Player of the Year. And I mean, Micah Parsons is up there. He's not, top 5, but 12 sacks, and I think it's like 75 tackles right now. I mean, that's crazy. And if you look at all the other guys, like I said, they're edge rushers. They don't have a lot of other tackles. They really, obviously they impact the run game because they're just such good players. But Micah Parsons has a massive impact in the pass game and the run game. And I'd argue combined, he has more of an impact than the other guys. And something else to think about, the Cowboys defense was awful last year. It was so bad. And they didn't really do too much to it other than draft Micah Parsons. And he has really turned that Cowboys defense into a top 5 unit. So if you ask me if I had a vote for whatever reason, I would vote Micah Parsons for Defensive Player of the Year.
I would still be on the fence. I'd be waiting until the rest of the season and really seeing how these last few games play out, because I think it's that close between him, Garrett, and Watt. But for me, I think it's a 3-horse race where he is literally right up there with them. And that just speaks to how amazing his transition and immediate impact in the NFL has been.
And he actually is currently the betting favorite for Defensive Player of the Year. So,
wow.
I mean, it's really, really amazing.
Yep. And I think that we can continue on to a couple more NFL topics. I just wanted to talk about the Rams-Cardinals game last night. It was a highly anticipated Monday Night Football matchup, and it saw the Rams end kind of a rough patch these last few weeks by beating the previously top-seeded Cardinals 30-23, making the Cardinals drop to third in the NFC playoff picture. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on whether how this changes how you view these teams, and whether or not you'd consider both these teams to be Super Bowl contenders.
So first off, on that last point, I would argue that the Rams are more of a Super Bowl contenders than the Cardinals. I know the Rams had a few rough weeks, but I was reminded that the Rams have kind of done that every year. They start off really hot in the middle of the season. They lose a few games, maybe games that they shouldn't have lost. They just kind of lose their way a little bit, and then they pick it up as the season comes to a close. And I mean, I think that's pretty much what we saw this year. They started off really hot. They looked like a really good team. All of a sudden, they had 3 losses in a row. People said, oh, it's because they signed Von Miller, traded for, Odell. I think that's more of a coincidence than anything. I think, again, like we've seen the Rams start off hot, tank a little bit in the middle of the season, then they pick it up. And I think we saw last night the Rams are a very, very talented team. I think Matthew Stafford is a very good quarterback. We saw many very good throws from Matthew Stafford last night. And I think the Rams are going to be dangerous. They were not at full strength last night with some guys that tested positive for COVID a few hours before the game. And in regards to the Cardinals, I don't think they're there yet. I think they still need some experience regards to players and coaching. There were a few questionable decisions with Cliff Kingsbury last night. I know on the broadcast they were talking about kicking a field goal when they were down 10 with 2 minutes left at like the 40-yard line. I 100% would have done that. You have to get the ball back. Might as well give yourself more time. Kick the field goal, try the onside kick, which they ultimately got. And then you saw it on the last play of the game too. Just some miscommunication with Kyler, with the coaches, with the rest of the offense. So I think they're a talented team. I think they're still young and experienced. Could they make the Super Bowl? Sure. Do I think they will? Do I think they're Super Bowl contenders? Not this year.
Yeah, I really agree with your analysis on both those teams. Even when the Cardinals were undefeated and top seed in the NFC, I remained skeptical about their abilities to be true Super Bowl contenders. For me, the NFC this season has always been the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Green Bay Packers, and the Los Angeles Rams in terms of teams that I think have the best shot of going to the Super Bowl. I would be really surprised if it wasn't one of those 3 teams emerging from the NFC. And as you said, I think the lack of experience has really been the driving factor for my skepticism there. I really never thought that a quarterback head coach duo of Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, who will be experiencing the NFL playoffs for the very first time in their respective careers, would be able to beat out these really veteran built teams like the Bucks, like the Packers, and that's why I really never thought that the Cardinals would be able to get that far. And you know what? I think last night really did show that, because even though the Rams were in a slump, they were having to deal with multiple surprise absences, including star cornerback Jalen Ramsey, and they still were the better team from start to finish against the Cardinals. And as for the Rams, you said that it really is probably just a coincidence that they had that slump when they got Odell Beckham and Von Miller. But you know what? That might actually just be part of the adjustment period and integrating those players, because even though they're not the best players on that Rams team right now, they immediately commanded a very significant snap share. And along with that comes an acclimation period of learning the playbook, building rapport with teammates. And that could have been what was part of the reason that they were in that slump. And I definitely expected them to come out of the slump, and I think they did that last night, and they're really on their way to potentially the NFC Championship game. I think it'll be really interesting to see what 2 teams get to the NFC Championship game, because I think the Bucks, the Rams, and the Packers are, in my opinion, maybe even the 3 best teams in the entire NFL. And so I'm excited to see how that unfolds, but I would right now say the Rams are Super Bowl contenders and not the Cardinals.
Yeah, and a few last things on the Rams. Cooper Kupp has been amazing this season, and he was a guy that you were high on coming out of the draft. And what things did you see in Cooper Kupp a few years ago now that you still see in his game today?
Yeah, Cooper Kupp was actually my wide receiver 1 in his draft class, and I'll forever be very proud of that one. But I thought that he was an elite route runner with plenty of quickness and great hands, meaning that he would be able to line up against pretty much any cornerback and win that rep, because he knows how to get open and he can catch the football reliably. And I thought that he did those things at a much more consistent basis than the other wide receivers in that class, like Corey Davis, like Mike Williams, like John Ross, that went far ahead of him. I saw him perform extremely well at the Senior Bowl, which for me was extremely important given that he came out of Eastern Washington, a guy that's playing at that competition level. I really need to see him be able to show up to the Senior Bowl and be one of the best players on the field. And it's exactly what Cooper Kupp did. I think that year he really was the best player at the whole Senior Bowl. And so that really sold me on him. And then I think what dropped him to the third round, because he was actually getting first round buzz coming out of the Senior Bowl, was the 4.7 40-yard dash that he ran. But when you watch his tape, he doesn't need blazing speed to win, because his route running is so silky smooth and intelligent and crafty that's how he wins. And so I really wasn't concerned by that, while it seems like the NFL world really did hold that against him. So that's what went into me thinking Cooper Kupp was that good of a player, and he sure has shown that this year with this amazing career year he's having.
Yeah, and last things before we move on to the next topic. Another team that I wouldn't want to play in December and January, the San Francisco 49ers. I think they're starting to look hot. Jimmy Garoppolo has been playing very well. He's been very efficient, hasn't created a lot of turnovers. They have a very good defense. I mean, they got Deebo Samuel, plenty of playmakers on offense. I'm not saying they're Super Bowl contenders, but they're definitely not a team they're a team that I would definitely not want to play in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I still think they're in the next tier behind the three teams that I mentioned. But you're right. Even if they do match up to one of those teams and end up losing the game, that they could take one of those teams to the very end and maybe even create an upset. I agree with you on that take. And for our last NFL topic, I just wanted to get our thoughts on the AFC North playoff race, which is shaping up to be extremely interesting with all four teams still in the mix. The Ravens are leading the division currently at 8-5, followed by the Browns at 7-6, the Bengals at 7-6, and the Steelers at 6-1. And they pretty much all of these teams have a pretty tough remaining schedule, meaning that it's going to be a really tight race down to the end. And let's each reveal our picks for who wins this division. I'll let you start.
I'm going to take the Bengals.
Wow.
And the Ravens, I would have taken the Ravens 2 weeks ago. They just injury after injury after injury after injury. Now Lamar's injured with his ankle. I mean, who knows how effective he's going to be in the next few weeks with, not being able to really scramble and run too much. And then the Browns, it comes down to I'd take Joe Burrow over Baker Mayfield to me. And that's why I'm going with the Bengals. I think the Ravens are too injured to keep up that first place, and I'm taking Joe Burrow over Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take the Ravens here. I think that they're definitely getting hit by injuries pretty hard, but when I look at the remaining schedules for each of these teams, sorry, I don't think that any of these teams will be winning more than 2 games here on out. I would be surprised if any of these teams goes 3-1. Despite the injury issues the Ravens are having, I do expect them to be able to win 2 of these remaining games, which if none of the other teams win more than 2 games would give the Ravens first place in this division. I think the Bengals have been too inconsistent to go 3-1 with the teams they have the remaining, that being the Broncos, the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Browns. And I think that the Ravens are a very well-coached team who, Lamar is hurt, but I think that but by the last couple of games, he'll be healthy enough to get this offense back on track. I think the defense is good, and they have a 1-game lead. And I think a 1-game lead with how tough the remaining 4 games are for each of these teams is really valuable. And that's why I think that they'll end up being able to hold out the lead in this division.
Yeah, I think they have 1 game left against the Bengals, and I see the Bengals winning that game. Okay. I'd argue whoever wins that game is going to end up winning the division.
I agree.
But I mean, I could see the Ravens going 1-3 the remaining schedule. I mean, they have the Packers, the Bengals, the Rams. That's a gauntlet 3 games. And honestly, they could drop off all 3 of those. And I think the Bengals can beat the Broncos next week. I think they're going to beat the Ravens in 2 weeks. And then they have Chiefs, Browns. Maybe they lose to the Chiefs, beat the Browns, and to me that would put them in first.
Yeah, I think that the Steelers, or I think the Ravens will find a way to beat the Bengals after getting embarrassed against the Bengals earlier this season. I think that they've been looking at that tape all year, knowing how crucial that game is, and they're going to come out much stronger than they did in that first game. But I agree with you. I think that whoever wins that matchup will be winning the AFC North.
And I think now we can move on to pretty much the hottest topic in college football, not including, the playoffs and the Heisman. Spencer Rattler officially is transferred to South Carolina. And when I first heard that, I was shocked. I was like, why South Carolina? But then we dug a little deeper, and maybe you can explain why that South Carolina choice makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, the obvious answer is that South Carolina's head coach Shane Beamer was the associate head coach at Oklahoma from 2018 to 2020. And let me just back up a little bit and talk about Spencer Rattler's college career thus far. He had a really interesting 2020 season as a redshirt freshman, in which the first half of the season was pretty rocky, but he played lights out the second half of the season. He's got great natural traits. Like, he's a really twitchy quarterback with great arm strength. He can throw from a variety of arm angles and platforms. He's athletic too, and he seems to be the total package in terms of the traits that you can't teach, the physical traits and the athletic traits. And how well he played in the second half of the 2020 season and just the improvement over the course of that season led us to believe that he was in prime position to have a great year in 2021. And we pretty much had him as our Heisman contender, or may or favorite really, and we had him as our QB1 heading into this 2021 season. That obviously did not pan out at all. He ended up having a really inconsistent first half of the season and got benched for Caleb Williams and had to head to the transfer portal. Even with Lincoln Riley on his way out, it just seemed like Oklahoma wasn't the right place for him and he needed a fresh start. And so here he is returning to team up with Shane Beamer at South Carolina. And so, it makes sense because of Beamer's presence, but I'm still skeptical, because I think that one, South Carolina has no track record of producing NFL quarterbacks, and that's just something you have to take into consideration. And the other thing is that he's going to be playing against better teams pretty much all year. In the SEC, South Carolina is one of the lesser teams, honestly, especially on offense, I think. And the opposing defense is going to be better the majority of the week. So he really has a tough task ahead of him. That being said, he has the natural talent to be the type of quarterback that elevates an offense. And so I think it's still intriguing because, I still believe in his natural abilities. He's going back to work with Beamer, who he had such a good 2020 season under. So you know what? It could pan out, and I'll definitely be watching that one closely.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing we won't have to worry about is, the things you think about when you're scouting quarterback playing at, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson. Like you said, we won't have to worry about them being on a more talented offense than the opposing defense. And that was the biggest, question mark for me. Like, he's going to be pretty much, for the most part, like you said, talent deprived compared to the defense that he's playing. We know the SEC is, pretty much has the best defenses in the country. And, like you said, South Carolina is kind of in the basement of the SEC. I know Frank Beamer has done a good job this year at South Carolina. So it will be interesting. I'm sure he's going to pull some highly touted recruits that are, not the 5-star, but maybe some of the 4-star guys that, have South Carolina and a few other higher end schools where, maybe they'd have to sit a year or two to really play. And, because South Carolina doesn't have the greatest talent pool in the world right now, maybe, he can pull some of those highly ranked recruits that would want to come play with him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I wouldn't exclude Rattler having a great season and putting himself right back into first round contention in 2022 or 2023, NFL draft class.
Yeah, definitely a really interesting storyline to watch. And now, a last few, things we want to talk about. Like Kosta said at the beginning of this podcast, this is going to be our last Hot Topics podcast. With the college season pretty much wrapping up, we're going to be able to start scouting reports now that everyone's tape will pretty much be in. So this week we'll have Kayvon Thibodeau and Kyle Hamilton. Those scouting reports will get posted later this week. And then we're going to start, talking about the NFL draft, and you can talk about what we're going to talk about next week.
Yeah, next week we'll actually be scouting the top wide receivers in advance of Tuesday's show. Those wide receivers being the group of 5 of the 2 Ohio State wide receivers, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, then Jameson Williams from Alabama, Jahan Dotson from Penn State, and the final wide receiver is Treylon Burks, who just a sneak peek. We really like Treylon Burks from Arkansas. And so we'll be scouting each of those guys, and we will give our prospective preliminary rankings of those players in the wide receiver class on Tuesday. So we're really looking forward to that. And the other thing that you can look forward to, on top of these consistent final scouting reports that'll start rolling out starting this week with Thibodeau and Hamilton, will be NFL draft prospect interviews. We're going to start reaching out to some of the guys that are expected to be drafted in April's draft and lining up some interviews as we did last draft process and as we did this summer. So we're really excited for those. Those are always great experiences to have ourselves and to share with you guys. And it definitely is a really exciting time to be following Bull Take Scouting, because we're really getting into that NFL draft mindset now.
Yeah, definitely will be fun. We'll be ramping up the draft content, ramping up scouting reports, and with some of these scouting reports that we're going to be posting, be sure to look back from before the start of the college season and over the summer, and you can see what we thought about these guys heading into their final collegiate season, and now what we think about them, some of the things that they might have improved on over the course of the season. So I know for myself, it'll definitely be interesting to look back and look at some of these scouting reports that we put out of these guys and see did they improve on these things or not, because that's definitely something that you take into account in the scouting process.
Yeah, I think that wraps up our show. And as we said, we'll see you next Tuesday at 7:30 for our wide receiver 2022 NFL draft class breakdown. And thanks for joining us today. Have a good one.